The sound echoed through the upscale restaurant like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused midway to every mouth. The clatter of dropped silverware seemed deafening in the sudden silence that followed the sharp crack of palm against cheek. Zara Thompson stood frozen, her hand pressed against her burning face, her other arm protectively wrapped around her 6-month pregnant belly. The red handprint on her dark skin was already visible, a stark reminder of what had just happened in front of 50 of the city's most elite diners. "You embarrass me one more time and I'll make sure you lose everything," Blake Thompson hissed through clenched teeth, his voice low but carrying clearly in the stunned quiet. His perfectly tailored suit didn't hide the rage radiating from his body as he towered over his wife. "Coming here making a scene about some ridiculous story you heard. You're paranoid and pathetic." Zara's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of these people who were already pulling out their phones to record her humiliation. I saw the photos, Blake. I saw you with her. I'm carrying your child and you? You saw nothing." Blake cut her off, his blue eyes cold as ice. "And if you keep running your mouth with these lies, I'll file for divorce tomorrow and make sure you get nothing. Nothing at all. You'll be just another broke single mother with a bastard child." The words hit Zara harder than the slap had. She staggered backward, bumping into an empty chair, her breath coming in short gasps. Around them, the whispers had already started. Phones were definitely recording now. By tomorrow, this would be all over social media. The billionaire Blake Thompson publicly humiliating his pregnant wife at his own 5-star restaurant. But in the kitchen, behind the swinging doors that separated the dining room from the controlled chaos of food preparation, someone else had witnessed every word, every gesture, every second of Blake Thompson's public assault on his wife. Commander Ryan Thompson, though he'd left that title behind 2 years ago when he traded his military fatigues for Chef White, stood perfectly still, his dark hands gripping a knife so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. His jaw was clenched, every muscle in his 6'2" frame coiled like a spring ready to snap. That was his baby sister out there. Zara. The little girl he'd protected from playground bullies and teenage heartbreak, the woman he'd walked down the aisle 3 years ago because their parents weren't alive to do it themselves. And this monster she'd married had just hit her. In public. While she was carrying his child. Ryan had seen combat in 3 different countries. He'd been shot at, bombed, and faced down terrorists without flinching. But watching some spoiled rich boy put his hands on Zara made him see red in a way that 15 years of military service never had. The other kitchen staff had noticed his reaction. The sous chef, Maria, touched his arm gently. "Chef Thompson? You okay?" Ryan forced himself to set down the knife carefully. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the effort it took not to burst through those doors and show Blake Thompson exactly what a Navy SEAL could do to someone who hurt his family. "Keep cooking," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "I need to step out for a minute." He moved to the small window that looked out into the dining room, watching as Blake straightened his tie like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just committed assault in front of 50 witnesses. The other diners were pretending to eat now, but their eyes kept flicking to where Zara still stood, trembling and holding her face. Blake was already walking away from her, heading toward the bar where a blonde woman waited with a martini and a satisfied smirk. Ryan recognized her immediately from the private investigator photos he'd been studying for 2 weeks. Natasha Collins, social media influencer and Blake's mistress. Zara looked around the restaurant helplessly, her eyes searching for a friendly face, for anyone who might help her. But these weren't her people. These were Blake's people, his business associates and social climbing friends who cared more about their connections to his money than basic human decency. Finally, Zara began walking toward the exit, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand still protecting her unborn child. Ryan made his decision. He untied his chef's apron and tossed it on the counter. "Maria, you're in charge until I get back," he said, already moving toward the back exit. "But chef, the dinner service." "Handle it," Ryan said, pushing through the back door into the alley behind the restaurant. He ran around to the front of the building, arriving just as Zara stepped out onto the sidewalk. The October air was cold, and she was wearing only the thin maternity dress she'd put on for what she thought would be a romantic dinner with her husband. "Zara," he called softly. She turned, and when she saw him, her composed mask finally cracked. "Ryan? What are you? How did you?" "I work here," he said simply, stepping closer. In the light from the restaurant's windows, he could see the full extent of the damage. The left side of her face was swollen, her lip was cut, and there were finger-shaped bruises already forming on her upper arm where Blake had grabbed her. Ryan had killed men for less. "Oh God," Zara whispered, reaching for him. "You saw all that? You saw him?" "I saw everything," Ryan said, catching her hands in his. "And it's the last time he'll ever touch you. I promise you that." Zara started to shake, the shock finally hitting her. "He said he'd take everything if I left him. The house, my car, everything. And the baby, what if he tries to take the baby?" "He won't," Ryan said with quiet certainty. "Because he's going to have much bigger problems to worry about very soon." Inside the restaurant, Blake was laughing at something Natasha had said, completely unaware that his wife's brother was a man trained to bring down much more dangerous enemies than one spoiled billionaire who thought his money made him untouchable. But Ryan knew something Blake didn't. Money couldn't protect you from everything. And sometimes, justice came from the most unexpected places, like the kitchen of your own restaurant, where the man you'd never bothered to really notice was planning to destroy your entire world. As Ryan helped his sister into his truck, he was already running through everything he knew about Blake's business empire, every weakness he'd observed during his 2 years of working in the man's restaurant, every careless conversation Blake had held within earshot of just the help. Blake Thompson had made the biggest mistake of his life tonight. He'd shown his true nature to the wrong person. And now he was going to learn why you never, ever hurt a Navy SEAL's family. The hunt was about to begin. Ryan drove through the quiet streets while Zara sat in the passenger seat, holding an ice pack to her face. Neither of them spoke for the first 10 minutes, the silence heavy with shared memories and unspoken promises. "Remember when Tommy Martinez pushed me off the swing set in 4th grade? Zara finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You came home with a bloody knee and a torn dress. I found him after school and made sure he never looked at you wrong again. You were only in 6th grade, but you seemed so big to me then. So strong." She touched her swollen cheek gently. "I keep thinking I should feel more surprised by what happened tonight, but I'm not. Blake's been building up to this for months." Ryan pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, somewhere Blake would never think to look for them. "Tell me everything, Zara. From the beginning." Inside the nearly empty diner, they took a booth in the back corner. The fluorescent lights were harsh, but Ryan needed to see the full extent of her injuries. A teenage waitress with purple hair brought them coffee and tried not to stare at Zara's face. "It started about 6 months ago," Zara began, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Blake started working late more often. Business trips that didn't make sense. When I got pregnant, instead of being happy, he seemed angry. Like I'd ruined some plan he had." Ryan listened without interrupting, filing away every detail. In the military, intelligence gathering was everything. The smallest detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Then I found the credit card statements," Zara continued. "Jewelry purchases I never received. Hotel rooms in the city when he claimed to be traveling. Restaurant bills for 2 when he said he was eating alone." She paused to sip her coffee, wincing when it touched her split lip. "So I hired a private investigator." "What did you find?" Zara pulled out her phone and showed him a series of photographs. Blake and a blonde woman entering and leaving hotels. Blake and the same woman at intimate dinners. Blake and the woman shopping for jewelry that Zara had never seen. "Her name is Natasha Collins. She's some kind of social media person with 500,000 followers. The investigator said she's been telling people that Blake is going to leave me and marry her." Zara's voice broke slightly. "She posts pictures of expensive gifts and talks about her mysterious billionaire boyfriend, who's going to change her life." Ryan studied the photos carefully. He'd seen Natasha at the restaurant before, always alone at the bar, always perfectly dressed, always checking her phone like she was waiting for someone. Now he knew who she'd been waiting for. "That's why I went to the restaurant tonight," Zara said. "I thought if I confronted him in public around people who know us both, he'd at least try to explain, try to work things out. But instead he showed you exactly who he really is," Ryan finished. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the diner windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, and Ryan remembered another late-night conversation in a similar place 15 years ago. He'd been 18, about to leave for basic training. Zara had been 13, crying because she was scared he wouldn't come back from the military like their father hadn't come back from his deployment in Afghanistan. "I'll always come back to you," he'd promised her that night. "No matter where I go, no matter what happens, I'll always protect you." Their parents had died in a car accident when Zara was 10 and Ryan was 15. He'd become her guardian, working after school and on weekends to keep them together until he turned 18 and could officially take custody. When he joined the Navy, his only condition was that Zara be allowed to live with his commanding officer's family so she could finish high school in a stable environment. Now, looking at his little sister's bruised face, Ryan felt like he'd failed in that promise. He'd been so focused on building his new career as a chef that he hadn't seen what was happening to the most important person in his life. "I should have known," he said quietly. "I've been working at Blake's restaurant for 2 years. I should have seen the signs." "How could you have known?" "I barely knew myself until tonight." Zara reached across the table and took his hand. "Ryan, I need you to promise me something." "Anything. Promise me you won't do anything violent. I know you and I know what you're capable of. But I don't want you to end up in jail because of him. This baby needs you free and safe." Ryan looked at their joined hands. Zara's were soft and small, artist's hands that had never known violence. His were scarred from years of combat and kitchen burns, hands that had done things she'd never need to know about. "I promise," he said. "No violence." It was a promise he intended to keep. But Ryan had learned a lot in his 15 years of military service. He'd learned that there were many ways to destroy an enemy without ever laying a hand on them. He'd learned that the right information in the wrong hands could topple governments and bring down men who thought they were untouchable. And he'd learned that the most dangerous weapon in the world wasn't a gun or a bomb, it was the truth. "I'm scared, Ryan," Zara whispered. "What if he really does take everything? What if he finds a way to take my baby?" "He won't," Ryan said with quiet conviction. "Because by the time I'm done with Blake Thompson, he's going to be too busy trying to stay out of prison to worry about custody battles." Zara frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that in 2 years of working in his restaurant, I've overheard a lot of interesting conversations. Business deals that didn't sound quite right. Phone calls that made me wonder who Blake Thompson really gets his money from." Ryan's smile was sharp as a blade. "I think it's time I started paying closer attention to Mr. Thompson's business practices." "Ryan, what are you planning?" "Justice," he said simply. "The kind that comes from shining a light on the truth and letting the right people know what they're looking at." Outside the diner, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show in the eastern sky. Ryan had a lot of work to do and not much time to do it. Blake Thompson might think he'd won tonight, but he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd underestimated the quiet man in the kitchen who'd been watching and listening for 2 years, learning everything there was to know about his operation. And most importantly, he'd hurt the one person in the world that Ryan would die to protect. The war was about to begin, and Blake had no idea what was coming for him. Blake Thompson stood in his penthouse bathroom at 6 in the morning, examining his reflection in the marble-framed mirror. Not a single mark on him, of course. He'd learned long ago how to control his strength, how to make a point without leaving evidence that could come back to hurt him in court. The bathroom was larger than most people's bedrooms, all Italian marble and gold fixtures. From the floor to ceiling windows, he could see the entire city spread out below him like a kingdom he ruled. And in many ways he did rule it. His construction company had built half the skyscrapers in the skyline. His restaurants fed the wealthy and powerful. His real estate investments controlled some of the most valuable property in 3 states. All of it built on a foundation of carefully managed lies and strategic partnerships that most people were too stupid or too scared to question. Blake's phone buzzed on the marble countertop. A text from Natasha. "Saw the videos online. Perfect timing, baby. Now everyone knows she's crazy and you're the victim." He smiled as he read it. Trust Natasha to see the opportunity in everything. Several people had indeed posted videos of last night's scene to social media, but the angles and audio quality made it look exactly like what Blake needed it to look, like a hysterical pregnant woman making unfounded accusations against her patient, long-suffering husband. His phone rang. Natasha, of course. "Good morning, beautiful," Blake said, walking into his bedroom. The king-size bed was empty and unmade. Zara hadn't come home last night, which was fine with him. Let her run to whatever friend or relative would take her in. It just made his narrative stronger. "Have you seen Instagram this morning?" Natasha's voice was excited, breathless. "I gained 10,000 followers overnight. Everyone's calling you a saint for putting up with her behavior." Blake sat on the edge of the bed, looking out at his view of the city. "Where are you?" "At home, but I can be there in 20 minutes. I think we should celebrate." "Not yet," Blake said. "We need to be smart about this. Let the dust settle for a few days. Let people feel sorry for me before they see us together." There was a pause. "Blake, how much longer do we have to sneak around? You said when she was out of the picture, we could be together publicly. And we will be. Soon." Blake's voice was soothing, practiced. He'd been managing Natasha's expectations for months, keeping her happy with expensive gifts and promises of a future that he might or might not deliver on. But I need to handle the business side first. Make sure the divorce settlement protects my assets. What he didn't tell Natasha was that he had no intention of marrying her or anyone else. Marriage was a liability, especially to someone as ambitious and money-hungry as Natasha Collins. She was useful now, but Blake Thompson didn't make the same mistake twice. His first mistake had been marrying Zara at all. She'd been different than artistic, independent, impressed by his success but not defined by it. She'd had her own gallery, her own money, her own life. It had seemed like a good match at the time. But pregnancy had changed her. Made her needy, emotional, suspicious. She'd started asking questions about his business, wanting to know why he traveled so much, why he had meetings at all hours with people she never met. Blake had worked too hard building his empire to let some pregnant woman tear it down with her curiosity. His empire wasn't entirely legal, of course. The construction company was legitimate, but some of the contracts came through connections that preferred their business relationships remain private. The restaurants were profitable, but they also provided excellent opportunities to clean money that came from less respectable sources. The real estate investments were genius, especially when you had inside information about city planning decisions that weren't public yet. None of it was technically illegal if you knew how to structure the deals correctly. And Blake had the best lawyers money could buy to make sure everything stayed in the gray areas of the law. But Zara had been getting too close to discovering things she couldn't understand and definitely couldn't keep quiet about. The pregnancy had made her emotional and unpredictable. Last night had been the perfect opportunity to discredit her publicly before she could cause real damage. Blake's phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer, Harrison Pierce. "Blake, I've been getting calls all morning about videos from your restaurant last night. What the hell happened?" "My wife had a breakdown," Blake said calmly. "Pregnancy hormones, probably. She came to the restaurant making wild accusations about infidelity, causing a scene in front of our guests. I had to physically restrain her before she hurt herself or someone else. The video I saw showed you hitting her." "Self-defense," Blake said without missing a beat. "She was coming at me with a steak knife. I had to stop her before someone got hurt. There had been no steak knife, of course, but there were enough different camera angles and the lighting in the restaurant was dim enough that reasonable doubt would be easy to establish if it came to court." "Where is she now?" Pierce asked. "I don't know. She left the restaurant and didn't come home. Probably staying with friends, trying to figure out how to spin this to her advantage." "Blake, I need you to listen to me very carefully. File for divorce immediately. Today. Get ahead of this before she has time to mount a legal offensive." "Already planned," Blake said. "I want you to draft papers citing mental instability and emotional abuse. I want full custody of the child when it's born, and I want to make sure she gets the absolute minimum allowed by law. That might be difficult given your financial situation. She'll be entitled to what I decide she's entitled to," Blake cut him off. "And if she tries to fight it, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly how unstable she really is. A mother who would pull a knife on her husband in a public restaurant isn't fit to raise a child." After he hung up, Blake walked to his home office and opened the safe hidden behind a fake bookshelf. Inside were documents that told the real story of his business empire: contracts with shell companies, records of cash transactions, photographs of certain politicians accepting envelopes full of money, and detailed records of every favor he'd ever done for people who preferred to keep their business relationships private. Insurance, he called it. Protection against anyone who might think they could threaten him. Blake had learned early in life that everyone had secrets, and secrets were the most valuable currency in the world. He'd built his entire empire on knowing which secrets to keep and which ones to use as weapons. By noon, the divorce papers would be filed. By evening, every society blogger and gossip website in the city would have carefully edited versions of last night's video showing Zara as an unstable woman who'd attacked her innocent husband. And by the end of the week, Blake Thompson would be free to rebuild his life exactly the way he wanted it, without a paranoid wife asking inconvenient questions about his business. What Blake didn't know was that for the past 2 years, someone had been watching him very carefully. Someone who understood the value of secrets and knew how to use them as weapons. Someone who had just been given the perfect motivation to destroy everything Blake had built. The quiet man in the kitchen was about to become the most dangerous enemy Blake Thompson had ever faced. Ryan's apartment was a study in controlled organization. Every item had its place, every surface was clean, and every detail served a purpose. The skills that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments had translated seamlessly into civilian life, though most people who knew him as the chef had no idea about his military background. At 0600 hours old, habits died hard. Ryan sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and 3 laptops open in front of him. The first laptop showed surveillance footage from the restaurant security system, which he'd been quietly accessing for months as part of his responsibilities as head chef. The second laptop displayed financial records he'd been collecting from overheard conversations and carelessly discarded documents. The third laptop was running background checks on every person in Blake Thompson's inner circle. Zara was still asleep in his guest bedroom. The doctor at the emergency clinic had confirmed that both she and the baby were fine, but had recommended rest and monitoring for signs of complications. Ryan had no intention of letting her out of his sight until Blake Thompson was no longer a threat to her safety. On his phone, Ryan scrolled through the social media videos from last night's incident. Blake had been right about one thing: the angles and lighting made it difficult to see exactly what had happened. But Ryan had been there. He'd heard every word, seen every gesture, and most importantly, he had access to the restaurant's internal security footage that showed much clearer angles. The first phase of his operation was intelligence gathering, and he'd been working on that for longer than anyone realized. 24 months of watching Blake Thompson had given Ryan a detailed picture of a man who thought he was untouchable. Blake's routine was predictable. Every Tuesday he met with a group of men at a private dining room in the restaurant. They spoke in low voices about construction contracts and city permits, about which officials needed convincing and how much that convincing would cost. Ryan had been serving them food and wine, invisible as furniture, while they planned activities that would make federal prosecutors very interested. Every Thursday, Blake met with his accountant and a lawyer Ryan didn't recognize from the legitimate side of Blake's business. They discussed offshore accounts and shell companies, ways to move money without attracting attention from tax authorities or banking regulators. And every Sunday, Blake met with a man named Vincent Caruso, who owned several businesses that existed only on paper but somehow generated millions in revenue. Ryan had done enough research to know that Caruso had connections to organized crime families in 3 different states. Blake Thompson wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a criminal who'd built his empire on money laundering, tax evasion, and political corruption. And Ryan had been documenting all of it. At 0730, Ryan's phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. "Thompson," he answered. "Commander Thompson? This is Special Agent Janet Martinez with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I believe you reached out to our tip line yesterday evening." Ryan had made the call at 0300, after he'd gotten Zara settled and had time to think through his options. The FBI tip line was anonymous, but Ryan had provided enough specific information to get their attention while being careful not to reveal his own identity or involvement. "Yes, I did," Ryan said. "I have information about possible financial crimes involving Blake Thompson and his business associates. Can you meet today? I'd like to discuss what you know and what kind of evidence you might have access to." "I can meet, but I have conditions. This meeting stays completely confidential until I decide to go public with my information. And I want to understand exactly what kind of protection you can offer to potential witnesses." There was a pause. "Commander Thompson, our records show you served with distinction in Navy Special Operations. Is this related to your military service?" "No," Ryan said. "This is personal." They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown at 1400 hours. Ryan had 4 hours to prepare a presentation that would convince federal investigators to take Blake Thompson seriously as a target. He spent the first hour organizing his evidence into categories: financial crimes, political corruption, and organized crime connections. Each category had dozens of documents, photographs, and recorded conversations that painted a picture of systematic criminal activity spanning at least 5 years. The second hour was spent preparing backup copies of everything and storing them in multiple secure locations. Rule number 1 of intelligence work: never put all your eggs in one basket. The third hour was spent researching Agent Martinez and the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He needed to understand their priorities, their methods, and their track record with cases similar to Blake Thompson's. The fourth hour was spent checking on Zara and making sure she understood that she was safe in his apartment while he was gone. "You're planning something," she said, watching him organize documents into a briefcase. "Something bigger than just divorce lawyers and custody battles." "I'm going to make sure Blake Thompson can never hurt you or anyone else again," Ryan said. "But I need you to trust me and stay hidden until this is over." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes to do it right," Ryan said. "Blake thinks he's untouchable because he's rich and powerful. But money can't protect you when the federal government decides you're a threat to national security. At exactly 1,400 hours, Ryan walked into the coffee shop and immediately identified Agent Martinez. She was sitting alone at a corner table, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying herself with the alertness of someone trained in law enforcement. Late 30s, Hispanic, wedding ring, and eyes that missed nothing. "Agent Martinez," Ryan said, taking the seat across from her. "Commander Thompson. Thank you for reaching out to us." She studied his face carefully. "Before we begin, I need to understand your motivation here. What's your connection to Blake Thompson?" "He's my sister's husband," Ryan said. "And last night he assaulted her in public while she's 6 months pregnant with his child." Agent Martinez's expression didn't change, but Ryan saw her hands tighten slightly on her coffee cup. "I see. And you believe he's involved in financial crimes?" "I know he is," Ryan said, opening his briefcase. "For the past 2 years, I've been working as head chef at his flagship restaurant. During that time, I've witnessed and documented systematic criminal activity involving money laundering, tax evasion, political corruption, and conspiracy with known organized crime figures." He slid a folder across the table. "This contains photocopies of documents I've collected, transcripts of conversations I've recorded, and detailed timelines of meetings between Blake Thompson and various criminal associates." Agent Martinez opened the folder and began reading. After several minutes, she looked up at Ryan with new interest. "Commander Thompson, if this information is accurate, we're talking about a case that could result in RICO charges. Multiple federal crimes. Potentially dozens of co-conspirators including elected officials and business leaders." "The information is accurate," Ryan said. "And I have access to much more. Blake Thompson has been operating under the assumption that restaurant staff are invisible and harmless. He's had sensitive conversations in front of me for 2 years without ever considering that I might be listening, recording, or understanding the implications of what I was hearing. What do you want from us?" "I want Blake Thompson investigated, arrested, and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want his criminal empire destroyed. And I want my sister protected from any retaliation while you build your case." Agent Martinez closed the folder and looked directly into Ryan's eyes. "Commander Thompson, are you prepared to testify in federal court about what you've witnessed?" "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to see justice done," Ryan said. "Then let's talk about setting up a formal operation. Because based on what you've shown me here, Blake Thompson is about to have a very bad month." As Ryan walked out of the coffee shop 2 hours later, he felt the familiar sense of mission clarity that had guided him through his military career. Blake Thompson had made a critical error in judgment. He'd hurt the wrong person's family. Now it was time to show him exactly what happened when you declared war on a Navy SEAL. Natasha Collins stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying the perfect shade of lipstick for her afternoon Instagram live session. Her followers were eager for updates about the dramatic restaurant incident they'd seen in the viral videos, and Natasha had spent all morning crafting the perfect narrative. She was the supportive girlfriend standing by her successful man during a difficult time with his unstable wife. She was the victim of a jealous woman's public breakdown. Most importantly, she was the beautiful, understanding partner who would soon be stepping into the role of Mrs. Blake Thompson. Her apartment was much smaller than Blake's penthouse, but it was perfectly staged for her social media content. Ring lights positioned strategically around the living room, a backdrop of designer handbags and luxury items that her mysterious boyfriend had bought her, and fresh flowers that she replaced weekly whether they needed it or not. Natasha had been building her following for 3 years, starting as a fitness influencer before transitioning into lifestyle content. She'd reached the point where sponsors paid her decent money to promote their products, but it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough for the life she wanted to live. Meeting Blake Thompson 6 months ago had changed everything. He was rich enough to buy her anything she wanted, powerful enough to open doors she couldn't open herself, and married enough to appreciate discretion. It had seemed like the perfect arrangement, until she'd started wanting more. Her phone buzzed with notifications as comments poured in on her latest post, a photo of an expensive bracelet Blake had given her last week, captioned with vague hints about new beginnings and exciting changes ahead. At Influencer Gossip, "Girl, we all saw the videos from last night. Is this about the restaurant drama?" At Natasha Stan 2022, "You deserve so much better than being the other woman." At Luxury Lifestyle, "When is he going to leave his wife for you?" Natasha smiled as she read through them. Her followers were invested in her love life, rooting for her to get her happily ever after with the mysterious billionaire. They didn't know his name, but they knew he existed, and they knew Natasha deserved to be with someone who could give her the world. She picked up her phone and dialed Blake's number. It went straight to voicemail, which was happening more often lately. He was probably dealing with lawyers and damage control from last night, but Natasha needed to know where she stood in his priorities. When he didn't call back within an hour, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She drove to Blake's office building downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel with Thompson Enterprises spelled out in silver letters across the front. The parking garage was full of expensive cars, and the lobby was all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. This was the life she wanted to be part of permanently. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 50s, looked up when Natasha approached the desk. "I'm here to see Blake Thompson," Natasha said, using her most confident voice. "Do you have an appointment, miss?" "Collins. Natasha Collins. I'm his close friend. He'll want to see me." The receptionist's expression didn't change, but Natasha caught a flicker of recognition. This woman had probably seen the social media videos too. "I'll call up to his office," the receptionist said, picking up her phone. After a brief, quiet conversation, she hung up and smiled politely. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson is in meetings all afternoon and cannot be disturbed." Natasha felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. Blake had never refused to see her before. Never made her wait or turned her away like she was some random person off the street. "Can you tell him it's about the situation from last night? He'll understand. I've given him your message, Miss Collins. He asked me to tell you that he'll call you when his schedule permits." The dismissal was clear and other people in the lobby were starting to stare. Natasha had no choice but to leave, but she was furious. After everything she'd done for Blake, after all the discretion and patience and understanding, he was treating her like an inconvenience. Back in her car, she called him again. This time he answered after 4 rings. "Natasha, I told you I'm busy today." "Blake, I just tried to visit your office and they wouldn't let me see you." "What's going on?" "What's going on is that I'm dealing with a crisis situation and I don't have time for drama right now." His voice was cold, distant. "My wife's breakdown last night has created legal complications that require my full attention." "Legal complications?" "Blake, this is our chance. She made herself look crazy in front of 50 people. Now you can divorce her and we can finally be together publicly." There was a long pause. "Natasha, we've talked about this. Things are complicated right now. They don't have to be complicated. You said when she was out of the picture we could be together. Well, she's out of the picture now. She embarrassed herself so badly that no one will blame you for leaving her. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Natasha's voice was getting sharper, more demanding. "Blake, I've been patient for 6 months. I've been discreet and understanding and supportive. But I'm not going to be your secret forever." "And what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think it's time for you to make a choice. Either you're serious about us or I need to reevaluate my priorities." Another long pause. "Are you threatening me, Natasha?" "I'm not threatening anything. I'm just saying that I have options too. I have a platform, I have followers who are very interested in my love life, and I have evidence of our relationship that would be very interesting to certain people." It was a bluff mostly. She had plenty of photos and messages from Blake, but nothing that would actually damage him legally. Still, the threat of public exposure was the only leverage she had. "I see," Blake said, his voice even colder now. "So you're trying to blackmail me into marriage." "I'm trying to get you to keep the promises you made to me." "Natasha, let me explain something to you very clearly. I am dealing with federal investigators, divorce lawyers, and a media crisis that could destroy everything I've built. The last thing I need right now is a social media influencer making demands and threatening to cause more problems." The words hit her like a slap. "Federal investigators? What are you talking about?" "Nothing that concerns you. But it means that this fantasy you have about us going public needs to end. Today." "Blake, wait. Goodbye, Natasha. Don't call me again until this situation is resolved." The line went dead, leaving Natasha staring at her phone in shock. In one conversation, she'd gone from being Blake's supportive girlfriend to being dismissed like an annoying stranger. But Natasha Collins hadn't built a social media following by backing down when things got difficult. She'd built it by being strategic, by knowing when to push and when to pivot, and by always having a backup plan. If Blake thought he could just discard her after 6 months of promises and expensive gifts, he was about to learn that Natasha was much more dangerous than he'd realized. She scrolled through her phone until she found the contact information for a gossip blogger who'd been trying to get details about her mysterious boyfriend for months. Someone who would pay very well for exclusive information about Blake Thompson's private life. Blake had made a serious mistake. He'd assumed that because Natasha needed his money, she would accept whatever treatment he decided to give her. But what he didn't understand was that Natasha had been planning for this relationship to be her ticket to permanent wealth and status. And if Blake Thompson thought he could use her and throw her away, he was about to discover that she had more ways to hurt him than he'd ever imagined. The war between Blake and his wife might be getting all the attention, but Natasha Collins was about to open a second front that would make his legal problems look simple by comparison. After all, hell hath no fury like an influencer scorned. Ryan had been operating on 3 hours of sleep for the past week, but his body was accustomed to functioning under extreme conditions. The rhythm of gathering intelligence, building cases, and coordinating with federal agents felt familiar in a way that surprised him. He'd thought leaving the military meant leaving that part of himself behind, but protecting Zara had awakened every skill he'd learned in 15 years of special operations. Agent Martinez had been impressed enough with Ryan's initial evidence to assign a full team to the Blake Thompson investigation. They'd given Ryan a secure phone, encrypted communication protocols, and most importantly, legal protection for his activities as a confidential informant. The FBI's interest in Blake had accelerated rapidly once they'd seen the scope of his criminal activities. What had started as a financial crimes investigation was now involving multiple federal agencies. The DA was interested in Blake's connections to Vincent Caruso's suspected drug trafficking operations. The IRS was fascinated by the complex web of offshore accounts and shell companies. And the Public Corruption Unit was very eager to learn more about Blake's relationships with city officials and state politicians. But Ryan's most valuable contribution wasn't the evidence he'd already collected, it was his continued access to Blake's operations. As far as Blake knew, Ryan was still just the head chef at his restaurant, invisible and harmless. Blake had no idea that his every move was being documented and reported to federal investigators. This morning, Ryan was preparing for what Agent Martinez had called a controlled encounter. Blake had scheduled a meeting with Vincent Caruso for lunch at the restaurant, and Ryan would be serving them personally while wearing a wire that would record every word of their conversation. At the restaurant, Ryan moved through his morning prep routine while his team set up for the lunch service. None of them knew about his investigation, but they'd all noticed the tension in the building since the incident with Blake's wife. "Chef, you okay?" asked Maria, his sous chef. "You've been different all week. More focused, but also like you're waiting for something to happen." "Just dealing with some personal stuff," Ryan said, checking the special recording device hidden in his chef's jacket. "Everything will be back to normal soon." At exactly noon, Blake arrived for his meeting. He looked tired and stressed, which was exactly what Ryan had hoped to see. A man under pressure made mistakes, and mistakes were what brought down criminal empires. Blake barely acknowledged Ryan as he led Vincent Caruso to the private dining room in the back of the restaurant. Caruso was exactly what central casting would order for a mid-level crime boss: expensive suit, gold jewelry, and an aura of barely controlled violence. Ryan prepared their lunch personally, taking his time to ensure the quality while positioning himself to overhear their conversation. The recording device would capture everything, but Ryan needed to understand the context and implications of what they were discussing. "The situation with your wife is unfortunate," Caruso said as Ryan served their appetizers. "But it might actually work in our favor. Distraction from our business arrangements." "The wife situation is handled," Blake replied. "She's staying with family and my lawyers are filing divorce papers this week. The media is portraying her as unstable, which protects me from any accusations she might try to make." "Good. Because we have bigger problems to worry about. My sources tell me there might be federal interest in our business relationships." Ryan's pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of intelligence Agent Martinez needed. "What kind of federal interest?" Blake asked. "Financial Crimes Unit has been asking questions about some of our mutual associates. Nothing direct yet, but enough to make me nervous. We might need to accelerate our timeline for the Miami operation." Ryan moved quietly around the room, refilling water glasses and adjusting place settings while recording every word. The Miami operation was something new. Agent Martinez would want to know about it immediately. "How accelerated?" Blake asked. "Next week instead of next month. Can you have the funds transferred by Friday?" "That's cutting it close, but yes. Assuming my divorce proceedings don't freeze any accounts." "They better not," Caruso said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "We have investors who don't like delays or complications. Vincent, I've been managing these arrangements for 5 years without a single problem. One unstable wife isn't going to bring down everything we've built." After they finished lunch and left, Ryan immediately contacted Agent Martinez using the secure phone. "We need to meet," he said when she answered. Today's conversation revealed new information about an operation in Miami that's being accelerated due to federal pressure. How accelerated? Next week. And Caruso mentioned investors who don't like complications. This sounds bigger than just local money laundering. Agent Martinez was quiet for a moment. Commander Thompson, we're going to need to move faster than we planned. If they're accelerating their timeline, we need to intercept this Miami operation before it happens. What do you need from me? Everything you can get about the financial transfers Blake mentioned. Account numbers, amounts, dates, destinations. And any information about these investors Caruso referenced. I can get that information, but it might require me to take some risks. Blake has been more suspicious lately, more careful about who he talks to and where. What kind of risks? Ryan looked around the empty restaurant, thinking through his options. I need access to Blake's office after hours. His computer, his files, his personal safe. Things that would be impossible to explain if I got caught. Commander Thompson, we can't officially authorize breaking and entering. You don't need to authorize anything, Ryan cut her off. I'm volunteering to gather intelligence on a criminal organization that threatens my family. What I do on my own time is my business. After ending the call, Ryan spent the rest of the afternoon planning his approach to Blake's office. The building had security, but nothing that would challenge someone with his training. The real difficulty would be accessing Blake's computer and safe without leaving any trace of his presence. That evening, Ryan checked on Zara before beginning his mission. She was doing well physically, but the stress of hiding and uncertainty about her future was taking its toll. How much longer do I have to stay hidden? She asked. Not much longer, Ryan promised. But I need you to trust me a little while longer. Blake is about to have much bigger problems than divorce proceedings. Ryan, what exactly are you doing? You're gone all day, you come back looking like you're planning military operations, and you keep making these cryptic promises about justice. I need to know what's happening. Ryan sat down beside his sister, weighing how much he could tell her without compromising the investigation. Blake isn't just a cheating husband, he said finally. He's a criminal. Money laundering, tax evasion, connections to organized crime. For 2 years, I've been gathering evidence of his activities, and now I'm working with federal investigators to bring him down. Zara stared at him in shock. Federal investigators? Ryan, this sounds dangerous. It is dangerous. But it's also the only way to make sure Blake can never hurt you or anyone else again. When this is over, he'll be in federal prison and you'll be free to raise your child without looking over your shoulder. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Ryan said, though they both knew that careful was a relative term when you were infiltrating a criminal organization. At 2 a.m., Ryan approached Blake's office building through a service entrance that connected to the restaurant's delivery area. His lock-picking skills were rusty but adequate, and the building's security system had blind spots that he'd been mapping for weeks. Blake's office was on the 15th floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. Ryan used a small flashlight to navigate to Blake's desk, where he began the delicate process of accessing the computer without triggering any security protocols. The safe was hidden behind a painting of Blake's first restaurant, and the combination was easier to crack than Ryan had expected. Inside, he found exactly what Agent Martinez needed: detailed financial records, account numbers for offshore banks, and contracts with shell companies that existed only to hide the source of illegal funds. Most importantly, he found a file labeled Miami Investment Group that contained information about a real estate development project that was clearly a front for money laundering on a massive scale. The investors Caruso had mentioned weren't just local criminals, they were part of an international network that moved hundreds of millions of dollars through fake real estate transactions. Ryan photographed everything with a camera designed to work in low light without flash, making sure to capture every detail that federal prosecutors would need to build their case. As he prepared to leave, Ryan found one more thing that made him smile with grim satisfaction: a letter from Blake's divorce attorney outlining a strategy to portray Zara as mentally unstable and unfit for custody. But that letter was about to become evidence in a federal criminal case that would make custody battles the least of Blake Thompson's concerns. By dawn, Ryan was back in his apartment with enough evidence to bring down not just Blake Thompson, but an entire criminal network that had been operating for years. The hunter had become the hunted, and Blake still had no idea what was coming for him. The grand ballroom of the downtown Hilton was transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast sparkling light across tables covered in white silk, each centerpiece featuring exotic flowers that cost more than most people's monthly salary. 500 of the city's most influential business leaders, politicians, and social elite had gathered for the annual Metropolitan Business Awards ceremony, where Blake Thompson was scheduled to receive the Entrepreneur of the Year award. It was the perfect stage for his public humiliation. Ryan stood in the hotel service kitchen, adjusting his chef's whites and reviewing the evening's timeline with Agent Martinez through his encrypted earpiece. The FBI had spent 2 weeks coordinating this operation, involving multiple agencies and requiring careful timing to ensure Blake's entire criminal network was captured simultaneously. All teams are in position, Agent Martinez's voice crackled in his ear. Miami team reports Caruso's associates are in custody. IRS agents are at the offshore banks with warrants. Public Corruption Unit is ready to arrest the city officials on your signal. Understood, Ryan murmured, checking the wireless microphone system he'd be using during the evening service. Blake just arrived. He's at table 1 with the mayor and 3 city councilmen. Perfect. Remember, we need him to incriminate himself publicly before we move in. The recordings from his office are solid evidence, but a public confession witnessed by 500 people will make the case airtight. Ryan had been planning this moment for 2 weeks, ever since he delivered the evidence from Blake's safe to the FBI. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: give Blake enough rope to hang himself in front of everyone who'd helped build his reputation. The evening began exactly as Blake had hoped. He gave a speech about entrepreneurship and community leadership that earned him a standing ovation. He posed for photographs with politicians and business leaders, projecting the image of a successful man who'd overcome recent personal difficulties to continue building his empire. What Blake didn't know was that Ryan had prepared a special presentation for the evening's entertainment. As head chef for the event, Ryan had insisted on personally serving the head table where Blake sat with the mayor and other city officials. It was unusual for a chef to serve at such a formal event, but Ryan had convinced the hotel management that it was part of his artistic vision for the evening. During the main course, Ryan approached Blake's table with a bottle of the restaurant's finest wine. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson," Ryan said, maintaining the deferential tone he'd perfected over 2 years of serving Blake. "I thought you might enjoy this vintage to celebrate your award." Blake barely looked at him. "Fine, whatever you recommend." As Ryan poured the wine, he leaned closer to Blake's ear. "Sir, there's been a situation at the restaurant. Nothing serious, but you might want to know about it." Blake looked up with mild irritation. "What kind of situation?" "Some men were asking questions about your business meetings. They seemed very interested in your arrangements with Mr. Caruso." Blake's face went pale. Around the table, the mayor and city councilmen were engaged in their own conversations, not paying attention to the chef serving wine. "What kind of men?" Blake asked quietly. "The kind who carry badges," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But don't worry, sir. I told them I was just kitchen staff and didn't know anything about your business. I've been loyal to you for 2 years, and I'm not about to start causing problems now." Blake's hand tightened on his wine glass. "Did they say what they wanted?" "They were asking about financial records, about meetings in the private dining room. They seem to know quite a lot already." Ryan straightened up, speaking in a normal voice again. "Should I prepare anything special for dessert, sir?" "No," Blake said, his mind clearly racing. "Just keep me informed if anyone else comes around asking questions." "Of course, sir." Ryan moved to the next table, satisfied that Blake was now sufficiently paranoid and off balance. The second phase of the evening was about to begin. At 9 o'clock, the hotel's audio-visual team began setting up for what they'd been told was a surprise video tribute to Blake Thompson's business achievements. Blake sat at the head table, accepting congratulations from other attendees, unaware that the tribute Ryan had prepared would destroy his life. "Ladies and gentlemen," the evening's host announced, "we have a special presentation honoring tonight's Entrepreneur of the Year award winner. Please direct your attention to the screens." The lights dimmed and 3 large screens around the ballroom came to life. But instead of a typical business tribute, they began showing security footage from Blake's restaurant, footage of his private meetings with Vincent Caruso, his conversations about money laundering operations, and his detailed discussions of bribing city officials. The audio was crystal clear, thanks to the recording equipment Ryan had been wearing during those meetings. Blake's voice filled the ballroom as he discussed illegal financial transfers, political corruption, and his connections to organized crime. The room fell silent as 500 of the city's elite watched Blake Thompson confess to multiple federal crimes in high-definition video. Blake shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage and panic. "Turn it off. Turn that off right now." But the presentation continued, showing Blake's conversations about the Miami money laundering operation, his plans to use his divorce proceedings to hide assets from federal investigators, and his casual discussions about corrupting public officials. "This is fake," Blake shouted, but his voice was being drowned out by his own recorded admissions of guilt playing through the ballroom sound system. Then the screens showed something even more damaging, footage from the night Blake had assaulted Zara at the restaurant, but from angles that clearly showed there had been no knife, no self-defense, just a powerful man hitting his pregnant wife because she discovered his crimes. The mayor and city councilmen at Blake's table were backing away from him, their faces showing the horror of men who realized they'd been sitting next to a federal criminal for the past 3 hours. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ryan's voice came through the ballroom's microphone system as he stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. "My name is Commander Ryan Thompson, United States Navy. For the past 2 years, I've been working undercover as a chef while gathering evidence of the criminal activities you've just witnessed." Blake spun around, staring at Ryan in shock and rage. You're just kitchen staff. You're nobody." "I'm nobody," Ryan agreed, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Just a man whose sister was beaten by her husband for discovering the truth about his criminal empire. But even nobody can bring down someone who thinks money makes them untouchable." The ballroom erupted in chaos as guests began shouting questions and hotel security tried to restore order. But Ryan wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, you once told my sister that she was nobody, that you'd make sure she got nothing if she tried to leave you. You told her that your money and power made you untouchable." Ryan's voice was calm, controlled, deadly. "You were wrong." At that moment, federal agents began entering the ballroom from every exit. Agent Martinez approached the head table with an arrest warrant, while other agents moved to detain the city officials who'd been caught on tape accepting bribes. "Blake Thompson," Agent Martinez announced, her voice carrying through the ballroom's microphone system, "you're under arrest for money laundering, tax evasion, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As handcuffs were placed on Blake's wrists, he stared at Ryan with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Ryan said simply. "Your criminal empire is finished, your political connections are going to prison, and your money can't protect you anymore. But most importantly, you'll never hurt my sister again." As Blake was led away in handcuffs, Ryan felt a hand touch his shoulder. He turned to see Zara standing behind him, having arrived with Agent Martinez for the final act of their operation. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "It's over," Ryan confirmed, putting his arm around his sister. "Blake Thompson will spend the next 20 years in federal prison. You're free, Zara. You and your baby are finally free." In the ballroom behind them, federal agents were making arrests while news crews captured every moment of the takedown. By morning, Blake Thompson's fall from grace would be front-page news across the country. The chef's justice had been served, and it was a dish best served cold. The news broke across every major network simultaneously at 6 a.m. the following morning. By noon, Blake Thompson's arrest was trending on every social media platform, and the video from the award ceremony had been viewed over 10 million times. Ryan sat in his apartment with Zara, watching the coverage while federal agents finished processing evidence from the previous night's arrests. The scope of Blake's criminal network had surprised even Agent Martinez. The investigation had resulted in 37 arrests across 6 states, including 2 state senators for city councilmen, and the mayor who'd been sitting at Blake's table during his public downfall. Former billionaire Blake Thompson was arrested last night at a business awards ceremony where evidence of his extensive criminal activities was presented to 500 witnesses, the news anchor reported. The FBI investigation, led by undercover operative Commander Ryan Thompson, uncovered a money laundering operation that processed over $200 million through fake real estate investments and shell companies. The television screen showed footage of Blake being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Then it cut to Agent Martinez giving a press conference outside the federal courthouse. "This investigation represents one of the largest financial crimes cases in the state's history," Martinez said. "The defendant operated a criminal enterprise that corrupted public officials, defrauded investors, and laundered money for organized crime families across multiple states." Zara turned to Ryan, who was reading through reports on his laptop. "How does it feel? Seeing him finally get what he deserves?" "Satisfying," Ryan admitted. "But the best part isn't watching him fall. It's knowing that you're safe now." The phone rang. It was Agent Martinez. "Commander Thompson, we need you at the federal building this afternoon for a debrief. The case is moving faster than we expected. Thompson's lawyers are already talking about a plea deal." What kind of plea deal? Ryan asked. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced sentences. He's looking at 25 to life under the RICO statute, but if he provides information about his organized crime connections, we might reduce that to 15 to 20. And what about restitution for his victims? That's where it gets interesting. Thompson's legitimate assets are worth about $40 million after we subtract the properties and accounts that were purchased with criminal proceeds. His wife would be entitled to half of that in a divorce settlement, but given the circumstances, my sister deserves every penny, Ryan said firmly. After hanging up, Ryan found Zara staring out the window at the city skyline. She'd been quiet since the arrest, processing everything that had happened and what it meant for her future. I keep thinking about something, she said finally. For 3 years, I thought I was married to a successful businessman. I thought his late nights and secretive phone calls were just part of building an empire. I never imagined. You couldn't have known, Ryan said. Blake was careful to keep his criminal activities separate from his public image. Even I didn't realize the full scope of what he was doing until I started investigating specifically. But I should have seen something. Some sign that the man I married was capable of. She touched her face where the bruise from Blake's slap had finally faded. How do you live with someone for 3 years and not know who they really are? Because criminals like Blake are experts at compartmentalization, Ryan said. They create different versions of themselves for different people. You saw the version he wanted you to see, the successful businessman, the loving husband. His criminal associates saw the version that could plan money laundering operations and corrupt public officials. Zara's phone buzzed with a text message. She looked at it and her face went pale. What is it? Ryan asked. It's from Natasha Collins. She wants to meet. Ryan frowned. Blake's mistress? What does she want? Zara showed him the message. I have information about Blake that you need to know. Things the FBI doesn't know about. Meet me at Central Park, South Entrance, 2 p.m. Don't go, Ryan said immediately. This could be a trap. Maybe Blake asked her to contact you, try to get information about our investigation. Or maybe she really does have information that could help, Zara countered. Ryan, what if there are other victims? Other women Blake was involved with? Other crimes the FBI hasn't discovered yet? Ryan considered this. Agent Martinez had mentioned that the investigation was ongoing, that Blake's cooperation might reveal additional criminal activities. If Natasha Collins had information that could strengthen the case against Blake, it might be worth the risk. If you're going to meet her, I'm coming with you, Ryan said. She might not talk if you're there. She probably doesn't know about your involvement in the investigation. Then I'll stay close but out of sight. But Zara, promise me you won't meet her alone. 2 hours later, Zara sat on a bench in Central Park while Ryan watched from a position behind nearby trees. Natasha Collins arrived exactly on time, looking nothing like the confident social media influencer from her online photos. She was nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder, and she'd clearly been crying recently. Thank you for coming, Natasha said, sitting down beside Zara. I wasn't sure you would. What information do you have? Zara asked, keeping her voice neutral. I know you probably hate me, Natasha began. And you have every right to. I knew Blake was married when I started seeing him. I told myself it didn't matter because he said he was going to leave you anyway. Did you know about his criminal activities? Natasha shook her head. Not until yesterday. But when I saw the news, when I heard about money laundering and organized crime, something started making sense. The expensive gifts he gave me, the way he always paid for everything in cash, the phone calls he'd take in another room. What specific information do you have? Names, Natasha said. Men Blake introduced me to at parties and events. Men who made me uncomfortable because they talked about business in ways that sounded wrong. I recorded some of those conversations on my phone because I was planning to use them to pressure Blake into leaving you. She pulled out her phone and played a recording. Blake's voice was clearly audible, along with 2 other men discussing a construction project that involved falsified safety inspections and bribed building officials. There are more, Natasha said. Hours of recordings from different events over the past 6 months. I was gathering ammunition for when Blake tried to end our relationship. Zara stared at her. You were planning to blackmail him? I was planning to make sure he kept his promises to me, Natasha said defensively. But now I realize he never had any intention of keeping those promises. And after seeing what he did to you at the restaurant, after learning about his criminal activities, I just want to help put him away for as long as possible. What? What changed your mind? Natasha was quiet for a long moment. Because I realized that if Blake could hit his pregnant wife in public, if he could plan criminal activities while pretending to be a respectable businessman, then he was capable of anything. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's going to blame me for his downfall. From his position behind the trees, Ryan could hear everything through the wireless transmitter Zara was wearing. The recordings Natasha had collected could indeed be valuable evidence, but he was also concerned about her motives. "I'll give you all the recordings," Natasha continued. "But I want something in return." "What?" "Protection. Blake has connections to dangerous people, and if he thinks I betrayed him, I could be in real danger. I want the FBI to give me the same kind of protection they're giving you." Zara looked at Natasha carefully. 6 months ago, this woman had been actively working to destroy her marriage. Now she was offering to help destroy Blake's criminal empire. "I'll talk to the FBI," Zara said finally. "But I can't make any promises about protection. That's their decision." "Thank you," Natasha said, handing over her phone. "The recordings are all in a folder labeled Insurance. There are also text messages and photos that might be useful." As Natasha walked away, Ryan emerged from his hiding spot and joined Zara on the bench. "What do you think?" she asked. "I think she's scared, and scared people sometimes tell the truth when they wouldn't otherwise," Ryan said. "But I also think she's looking out for herself first and helping us second. Does it matter as long as her information helps convict Blake?" Ryan considered this. "No, I guess it doesn't. Justice doesn't care about the motives of the people who help achieve it." That evening, Agent Martinez reviewed Natasha's recordings with Ryan and Zara at the federal building. The evidence was even more damaging than they'd hoped, clear proof of additional criminal activities that could add years to Blake's sentence. "This is excellent work," Martinez said. "With these recordings, plus the evidence Commander Thompson gathered, plus Blake's own admissions at the award ceremony, we have one of the strongest criminal cases I've ever seen." "What happens next?" Zara asked. "Blake's trial will probably begin in 6 months. With this much evidence, his lawyers will almost certainly recommend a plea deal. But even with cooperation, he's looking at a minimum of 15 years in federal prison." As they left the federal building, Zara looked up at the stars that were barely visible through the city's light pollution. "It's really over," she said, more to herself than to Ryan. "It's over," he confirmed. "Blake Thompson will never hurt you or anyone else again." But even as he said it, Ryan knew that some wounds took longer to heal than others. Blake might be finished, but Zara would need time to rebuild her life and learn to trust again. The most important thing was that she would have that time, and she would have it in safety. 6 months later, Ryan stood outside the federal courthouse watching news crews pack up their equipment after covering Blake Thompson's sentencing hearing. The trial had been even more devastating than Agent Martinez had predicted. Blake's criminal empire had unraveled completely, taking down dozens of corrupt officials and criminal associates with it. Inside the courthouse, Blake had just been sentenced to 22 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His plea deal had reduced the sentence from life imprisonment, but only because his cooperation had led to the arrest of Vincent Caruso and the dismantling of an international money laundering network that had been operating for over a decade. Zara emerged from the courthouse holding the hand of her 3-month-old daughter, Emma. The baby had been born healthy and beautiful, with her mother's dark eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded Ryan of himself. "How does it feel?" Agent Martinez asked, joining them on the courthouse steps. "Like closure," Zara said. "For the first time in a year, I can think about the future instead of worrying about the past." The financial settlement had been even more favorable than they'd hoped. Blake's legitimate assets, worth approximately $40 million, had been divided between victim restitution and Zara's divorce settlement. After paying back investors who'd been defrauded by Blake's schemes, Zara had received $26 million, more than enough to ensure she and her daughter would never have to worry about money. But more importantly, she discovered that she was stronger than she'd ever realized. "What are your plans now?" Martinez asked. "I'm reopening my art gallery," Zara said. "But this time, I'm focusing on supporting other women who are rebuilding their lives after domestic violence. Art therapy programs, financial literacy workshops, legal aid clinics. I want to make sure other women don't have to go through what I went through alone." Ryan smiled with pride. His little sister had not only survived Blake Thompson's abuse, she transformed the experience into something that would help others. "And you, Commander Thompson?" Martinez asked. "Any plans to return to military service?" "No," Ryan said, looking at his niece, who was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "I've got a restaurant to run and a family to protect. Besides, I think I've had enough excitement for one lifetime. That evening, Ryan hosted a quiet celebration dinner at his restaurant, which he'd purchased from Blake's bankruptcy estate for a fraction of its original value. The FBI investigation had cleared the restaurant of any criminal activity. It had been one of Blake's few legitimate businesses, but the negative publicity had forced it into financial trouble. Ryan had renamed it the Thompson Kitchen, and transformed it into exactly the kind of place he'd always wanted to run, focused on excellent food, fair wages for the staff, and service to the community rather than just the wealthy elite. Maria, his former sous chef who was now his business partner, raised a glass of champagne as the small group gathered around the chef's table in the kitchen. "To Ryan Thompson," she said, "who proved that sometimes the best revenge is simply the truth." "To Zara Thompson," Ryan countered, "who showed all of us what real strength looks like." "To baby Emma," Zara added, "who will grow up in a world where no one can hurt her family and get away with it." As they drank their champagne, Ryan reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. Blake Thompson's criminal empire was destroyed. Corrupt politicians were in prison. Vincent Caruso and his associates were facing life sentences. And most importantly, his sister was safe, strong, and building a new life for herself and her daughter. The investigation had also had unexpected consequences. Natasha Collins had indeed received federal protection in exchange for her cooperation, and the experience had apparently changed her perspective on life. She'd used the publicity from the case to pivot her social media presence toward advocating for victims of financial abuse, and she testified in several other cases involving wealthy men who'd used their power to manipulate and control women. Blake's other victims had also found justice. The investigation had uncovered evidence of a pattern of abuse spanning back years: other women he'd manipulated, other business partners he'd defrauded, other employees he'd intimidated into silence. The civil lawsuits alone would ensure that even if Blake ever got out of prison, he'd spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. "Uncle Ryan," came a small voice from across the kitchen. Ryan turned to see his 8-year-old nephew, Zara's son from a previous relationship, standing in the doorway. The boy had been living with relatives during the worst of the crisis, but he was back now, safe and protected. "Yes, kiddo? Mom says you're a hero. Is that true?" Ryan considered the question seriously. "No, buddy. I'm not a hero. I'm just a big brother who loves his family. But you caught the bad man who hurt Mom." "I helped catch him," Ryan corrected. "But the real heroes were the police officers and FBI agents who built the case and made sure he went to prison. I just provided information." The boy nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can you teach me to cook like you?" "I think that can be arranged," Ryan said, ruffling the boy's hair. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Ryan stood alone in his restaurant kitchen, cleaning the last of the dishes and preparing for the next day's service. The work was peaceful, meditative in a way that reminded him why he'd fallen in love with cooking in the first place. His phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Martinez. "Caruso conviction upheld on appeal. Life sentence stands. Thought you'd want to know." Ryan smiled and deleted the message. Vincent Caruso had been the last loose end from Blake's criminal network, and now he too would spend the rest of his life in prison. The case was finally, completely closed. As he locked up the restaurant and walked to his car, Ryan thought about the conversation he'd had with Zara earlier that day. "Do you ever regret it?" she'd asked. "Giving up your military career to become a chef? If you'd stayed in the Navy, you never would have been in position to investigate Blake." "I don't regret anything," he'd answered honestly. "Everything that happened led to this moment. You're safe, Emma is healthy, and Blake can never hurt anyone again. That's worth more than any career." Now, driving through the quiet city streets toward home, Ryan realized that he'd found something he'd been searching for without knowing it: a sense of purpose that went beyond military service or professional success. He'd found his mission, protecting the people he loved and making sure justice was served when powerful people thought they were above the law. It wasn't the career he'd planned, but it was the life he was meant to live. 1 year later, Ryan stood in the delivery room holding his newborn niece while Zara recovered from what the doctors assured them had been a completely normal labor and delivery. The baby was healthy, beautiful, and completely unaware that she'd been born into a family that had been through hell and come out stronger on the other side. "Have you chosen a name?" Ryan asked softly, looking down at the tiny face that seemed to be studying him with serious dark eyes. "Hope," Zara said without hesitation. "Hope Thompson. Because that's what she represents: a new beginning, a chance to build something better." Ryan nodded approvingly. It was a perfect name for a child who would grow up knowing that no matter what challenges life brought, her family would always fight for justice and protect each other. The past year had been transformative for both siblings. Zara's art gallery had become one of the most successful in the city, not just for its exhibitions but for its community programs. The Thompson Foundation, funded by her divorce settlement, had provided legal aid to over 200 women escaping abusive relationships and had funded 3 new domestic violence shelters. Ryan's restaurant had earned a James Beard nomination and had been featured in Food and Wine magazine, but more importantly, it had become a training ground for young chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The Thompson Kitchen Scholarship Program provided full culinary education to anyone who demonstrated talent and determination, regardless of their ability to pay. But the most satisfying part of their new lives was the simple fact that they were free. Free from fear, free from Blake's threats, and free to build the kind of family they'd always wanted. "Any word from the parole board?" Zara asked, adjusting her position in the hospital bed. "Blake's first parole hearing isn't for another 15 years, Ryan said. And given the severity of his crimes and the impact on his victims, the chances of early release are essentially zero." "Good," Zara said firmly. "I want Hope to be in high school before she ever has to worry about him." A knock on the door interrupted them. Agent Martinez entered carrying a bouquet of flowers and wearing civilian clothes. "Congratulations," she said, admiring the baby. "She's beautiful." "Thank you," Zara said. "And thank you for everything you did to make this possible. I know the investigation went far beyond what you originally planned." "It was worth it," Martinez said. "The Thompson case led to the largest organized crime takedown in the state's history. Dozens of criminals are in prison because of the evidence you helped us gather." She turned to Ryan. "I actually came here with an offer. The Bureau is starting a new program for civilian consultants with specialized skills. Former military, former law enforcement, people who understand how to gather intelligence and build cases. Interested?" Ryan considered the offer. Working with the FBI again would mean more cases like Blake's, more opportunities to bring down criminals who thought money and power made them untouchable. "Part-time only," he said finally. "My restaurant and my family come first." "Understood. We wouldn't have it any other way." After Martinez left, Ryan and Zara sat in comfortable silence, watching baby Hope sleep. Outside the hospital windows, the city bustled with its usual energy, but inside the room, everything was peaceful. "Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid?" Zara asked quietly. "Not of Blake specifically, but of trusting people again?" "I think fear keeps us careful," Ryan said. "And careful keeps us safe. But I also think we proved that we're stronger than anyone who might try to hurt us." "We make a good team," Zara said with a smile. "The best," Ryan agreed. 6 months later, Ryan was in his restaurant kitchen preparing for the evening service when his secure phone rang. Agent Martinez had a new case: a corrupt city contractor who was stealing money from public housing projects while families lived in dangerous, substandard conditions. "How long do you need to build a case?" Ryan asked, already calculating how he could infiltrate the contractor's operation. 6 months, maybe 8. He's been careful, but we think he's getting sloppy. Are you interested? Ryan looked around his kitchen, where his staff was busy preparing fresh ingredients and reviewing the evening's menu. Through the service window, he could see the dining room filling with customers who'd come not just for excellent food but for the sense of community he'd worked to create. This was his life now: chef, business owner, consultant for the FBI when justice needed serving, and most importantly, uncle to 2 children who would grow up knowing that their family would always fight for what was right. "Send me the details," Ryan said. "But I'll need to arrange coverage for the restaurant during the operation." "Already anticipated that. We've identified a chef who can take over temporarily. Former Marine, excellent credentials, completely trustworthy." "Of course you have," Ryan said with a laugh. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow morning. Briefing at 0800. After hanging up, Ryan walked out to the dining room where Zara was having dinner with Hope and her older son. The baby was sitting in a high chair, enthusiastically destroying a small piece of bread while her mother tried to keep her clean. "How was your day?" Zara asked as Ryan sat down. "Productive. The FBI has another case they want me to consult on." "Dangerous?" "Not more than usual. Just a corrupt contractor who thinks he's smarter than he actually is." Zara nodded. She'd learned not to worry too much about Ryan's FBI consulting work. He was too skilled and too careful to take unnecessary risks, and the cases he worked on resulted in justice for people who needed it. "Will you be back for Hope's first birthday party?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Ryan promised. As the evening progressed and the restaurant filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter, Ryan felt the deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful. His life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned, but it had turned out exactly the way it was supposed to. Blake Thompson was serving year 2 of his 22-year sentence, and according to prison reports, he was not adapting well to life behind bars. Men who'd built their identity around wealth and power rarely did well when stripped of both. Natasha Collins had used her experience to build a new career as an advocate for financial abuse victims, and she testified in congressional hearings about the need for stronger oversight of wealthy individuals who used their resources to manipulate and control others. The corrupt politicians who'd taken Blake's bribes were serving their own prison sentences, and the city had implemented new transparency requirements that made similar corruption much more difficult. Most importantly, Zara and her children were thriving. The gallery was successful, the foundation was helping hundreds of women escape dangerous situations, and hope was growing into a confident, happy child who would never know a world where her family was afraid. As Ryan locked up the restaurant that night and walked to his car, he reflected on how much had changed since that terrible evening when Blake had slapped Zara in front of 50 witnesses. That moment of violence had set in motion a chain of events that had brought justice not just to Blake but to an entire network of criminals. Sometimes the smallest act of courage, like a sister trusting her brother enough to tell him the truth about her marriage, could change everything. Ryan had learned in the military that every mission started with a single step forward, even when you couldn't see the destination. This mission had taken longer than expected and had required more resources than originally planned, but it had achieved its objectives completely. Blake Thompson would never hurt anyone again. Zara and her children were safe and thriving. And Ryan had found a new purpose that combined all his skills in service of justice. As he drove home through the quiet city streets, Ryan smiled, thinking about tomorrow's briefing with Agent Martinez. Somewhere out there, another criminal thought money and power made them untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise. The chef's justice was always ready to be served, one case at a time.